Across the roguelike genre, few games excel in storytelling and gameplay in as engaging a manner as Hades. Developed by Supergiant Games, Hades is considered by many to be a masterwork of the roguelike experience, and the game has received no shortage of acclaim on these fronts. Set in the mythological Greek Underworld, Hades tells the original tale of Zagreus, an oft-forgotten son of the god of the underworld itself, and details his persistent intent to escape his father's domain and make for the world of the living. Ever since release, Hades has compelled players with its clean and fast-paced combat system, its extremely robust, fully voiced-over dialogue tree, and a story revolving around the concepts of persistence and death, two themes central not only to the game's setting and the mythology upon which it's based, but also to the roguelike genre as a whole. Thus, when it was announced at the 2022 Game Awards that Supergiant would be producing their first-ever sequel, Hades 2, to expand upon the story, characters, and setting established by the original game, one can imagine the surprise and joy felt by fans the world over. The sequel follows Melinoe, another minor deity and sibling of Zagreus, in her quest to slay Kronos, her grandfather, the ancient titan of time, all while expanding upon the world established in the original game. But now that Hades 2 has been out for a little while, and people have thoroughly explored what the game has to offer so far, with more content promised as it exits early access later this year, I wanted to pay tribute to one of my favorite games, and now favorite series of all time, and bring to you the Hades series Iceberg. This is a chart that I've put together myself, as is typical on this channel, which contains all manner of facts, trivia, secrets, interesting character interactions, and more from both Hades and Hades 2. With 5 tiers and over 60 entries, my hope is that regardless of whether you've been a fan of Hades since the release of the first game, or whether you've just gotten into the series with Hades 2, that this chart, and by extension this video, will be able to fill you in on some of the compelling mythological tie-ins, more easily missed character interactions, or hidden plot points that you may not have known about previously. As I mentioned a minute ago, the original Hades game is one that I've come back to time and time again, so I've experienced a good many of today's topics firsthand, but in doing research for this video, there's been stuff that I was never even aware of, and hopefully I can share a little bit of that with all of you. So without further ado, let's make our way down into the pits of the underworld that is the Hades series Iceberg, starting with Tier 1. Let's start off with the basics. In the original Hades game, the Lernaean Bone Hydra is the second boss you'll encounter, found within the region of Asphodel. In life, the Hydra would have made its lair in the Lake of Lerna in the Argolid, but after being slain by Heracles as the second of his 12 labors, the beast has, as all earthly creatures do, ended up here in the underworld. In death, the Hydra's flesh has been stripped away, leaving only bone, yet it remains animate and inhibits Zagreus' path every time he should wish to pass from Asphodel into Elysium. But after dealing with the Hydra enough times, a unique option will make itself available, allowing Zagreus to choose whether or not to bestow upon the Hydra the nickname of Lerny, which, if proceeded with, will have some effect on the dialogue henceforth seen for the rest of the game, and the name change will also affect the title seen on the health bar and the defeat screen. Both Hades and Hades 2 have characters that serve as a sort of sentient punching bag for their respective protagonists found at the hub in each game. In Hades, there is of course the beloved Skelly, and in Hades 2, we're introduced to Skellimaeus, who bears an obvious resemblance to the former, both visually and in manner of speaking.
Now, how, you being serious here, pal? You brought that all this way for little old me? That's real nice of you.
Observe how patient my disciples are, studying your every move. If ever you're inclined to give them a demonstration of your prowess, or just want to blow off some steam, do not hesitate to wail upon me.
Now at first, some may think that Skellimaeus' resemblance and similarity of voice are simply a nod to the former game, one of many Easter eggs that can be found here, but as the game progresses and Melinoe speaks more and more with the character, it becomes rather apparent that Skelly and Skellimaeus are in fact the same person. One hint comes in the form of his keepsake. In Hades, Skelly will award Zagreus with the Lucky Tooth, an item that awards an additional death defiance when equipped, and in Hades 2, Skellimaeus will award Melinoe with the Luckier Tooth, which does the same thing. But the big nail in the coffin actually comes from the first game, where Zagreus himself actually uses the title to refer to Skelly. God Mode and Hell Mode are two optional difficulty modes that can be activated in both Hades and Hades 2. Each of these modes presents different effects that alter the game to make it easier or harder for the player depending on their wishes. The first of these, God Mode, can be toggled on or off from the options menu in either title, and in both games the mode has exactly the same effect, granting the player a buff called Deus Ex Machina, which reduces damage taken by 20% and increases up to 80% the more times Zagreus or Malinois fails to survive to the end of a run. It exists for the purpose of accessibility and to allow anyone to experience the story of Hades faster and more easily, though God Mode run records are not stored alongside regular run records. Hell Mode, on the other hand, is basically the exact opposite. Unlike God Mode, Hell Mode must be toggled on or off before creating a save, and it cannot be changed after you've started play. In the original Hades, using Hell Mode will result in the Pact of Punishment being immediately enabled, and the game itself will start on 5 heat with no option to go lower at any point. You'll also be automatically opted in to Personal Liability, which is a Hell Mode exclusive pact condition which removes the impervious effect that Zagreus would normally be granted upon taking burst damage. As of the time of recording, Hell Mode does not yet exist in Hades 2, though I wouldn't be surprised to see it added as the game makes its way out of early access. And I personally have got my fingers crossed, because this was far and away my favorite way to enjoy the original game. Erebus is a location that appears across the Hades series, first making a debut later into the original game after entering an infernal gate, an optional portal which takes you to the subdomain similar in principle to the Chaos Gate. Because of this, the manner in which we can interact with Erebus is relatively limited, but it's depicted as an indoor area with ornate stonework and a blue and orange color palette, where Zagreus will need to battle through waves of enemies without being hit in order to receive a reward. It also appears as the setting of a particular secret boss fight, which we'll talk about a little bit later on, so just keep that in mind for now. In Hades 2, however, Erebus was fleshed out much more considerably, and is entirely distinct from how it appeared in the previous game. Gone are the stone and fire, instead replaced with greenish-blue thickets and undead fauna. It's unclear if there's a distinct in-universe explanation for the differences in appearance between the depictions of Erebus in either game. Either way, though, the fact that there is a difference at all is definitely puzzling. Megara, undoubtedly the most story-rich of the Fury sisters, is one of the 3 romanceable characters in the original Hades. Meg and Zagreus' relationship changes a lot throughout the story of the game, going from being completely ideologically opposed from one another to fostering a sort of on-and-off romantic interest. But what makes Megara so different from the other characters vying for Zagreus' attention is that her and Zagreus, well, I'll just let the scene play. How about that?
Wow.
Meg, what I'm trying to say is, are we good? Oh.
Stop being insecure around me, Zach. You should know better than that by now. Though yes, if you must know, I think we're good. But if you tell another living soul, or even a dead one, I will kill you. Understand?
Well, I think there's only so many ways we can choose to interpret that, but more pressingly, I told you a big fat lie earlier in this entry, and while some of you may have figured it out by now, I've got to set the record straight. Megara is not the only character you can do this with, because there's a very similar cutscene that plays with Thanatos. And also again with Meg and Thanatos at the same time. Crazy things about to go down in the House of Hades for real. That just leaves Dusa, the last romanceable character, who's the only one that won't take you up on the offer to make the beast with 2 backs if given the chance, which makes sense considering how would that even work. Truth be told, I don't really want to think about it anymore, so let's move on. In Hades, Asterius, also known as the Bull of Minos, is a formidable foe encountered alongside Theseus, standing in the way of Zagreus as he attempts to ascend from Elysium to the Temple of Styx. But though these two are most often fought together, Asterius can also appear alone as a mini-boss encounter midway through Elysium. He uses many of the same techniques that he later employs, so it's actually a nice way to familiarize yourself with his moveset if you're a bit rusty. However, unlike other bosses, Asterius won't fight Zagreus to death. Instead, he'll only entertain the battle until he's whittled down sufficiently before leaving, and later, when encountered alongside Theseus, he'll go into the fight with slightly less health. In Hades 2, the Arcana card system serves as a way for Melinoe to enhance her abilities during runs. Each card provides a passive buff that will remain active for the entirety of the run, ranging from increasing damage, max health, or the odds of things such as higher rarity boons. You can unlock cards by trading Ash, and they can be activated if you have enough Grasp, which can be attained using Psyche. But while the abilities present on the cards will no doubt constitute the greatest concern for most players, it may be worth unlocking them all anyway just to read the small snippet of flavor text at the bottom of each. Most of the cards, if not all of them, bear some reference, or at least some potential reference, to characters throughout the series, and even beyond that into the general realm of Greek myth. I'm not 100% sure if I've got all of these right, but I'll put up the full list, at least so far as I can tell, on screen now in case anyone's interested, though it would definitely be worth taking a look at all of the cards yourself to read the corresponding flavor text. After building up enough of a relationship with various characters in Hades, especially Persephone, players will be able to partake in the game's epilogue, which involves talking to each one of the Olympian gods and inviting them to a feast at the House of Hades at Persephone's behest. Once completed, Zagreus can return to Persephone and give her the word that all of the invites have been delivered, at which point we'll be awarded with one of the few cutscenes in the game, showing how everything panned out at the dinner.
I say, big brother, you and your better half put on a positively smashing night. It's a relief for all of us, knowing Persephone is safe and sound, and mother to as noble of a son as my good nephew there.
Well, little brother, the Queen and I, in turn, appreciate you all taking time out of your doubtless busy lives to come all this distance to my house. I'm certain it is very modest in comparison to Mount Olympus, but I trust that you were suitably entertained.
Being the last major story beat in the entire game, it's a pretty touching scene, and a fitting resolution to Zagreus' escape attempts, although the game will of course allow you to still continue to pursue your escapes even after the epilogue is played. This is a phenomenon that has likely affected everyone who's played Hades or Hades 2 at some point in time. Throughout both titles, there are a few combat items that require the player to pick them up after they're used in order to be used again. In the first game, this takes the form of the cast, as long as it's not affected by a boon which removes this property. And in the second game, the skull weapon must be retrieved after it's thrown. However, if you've used these types of offensive techniques in the past, you'll be well aware that it's almost deceptively easy to accidentally throw these items off the map, which makes them inaccessible until their return timer runs out, which itself is a measure added in order to return these objects to you without needing to pick them up after a certain amount of time. These things getting stuck is obviously unintended, but it's notoriously easy to do in either title. If you stick around the House of Hades long enough in the first game, or if you go into Zagreus' room and then go back out again, there's a good chance you'll see all of these shades being lined up in front of Hades' desk in the middle of the area, and if you hang around further, you'll be able to bear witness to the god of the underworld actually undertaking the process of judging each shade in his presence. Now, I'm not sure if this is completely true or if it's just something I've observed, but it does seem like Hades may also show more favor to the shades that he judges as the story continues, and Zagreus softens him up a bit. When I started a new save to try and collect some of the early game footage for this video, it seems like every shade was getting denied whenever I would see this, but on an older, more complete save that I have on my Nintendo Switch of all places, there's actually a good number of shades getting through, so here's some footage of that using my terrible $20 capture card.
Elaborate. Granted.
In an entry that follows a very similar premise to the previous one, except in Hades 2 this time, revisiting the central part of the crossroads from the training grounds after having cleared all of the dialogue there in Hades 2, you may find Hecate and some of her followers performing a ritual of sorts around the incantation cauldron in the center of the area. Unlike the shade judging in the first game though, which was an event that we could only watch passively for the most part, this ritual is actually something that Malinois herself can partake in if she so desires. Doing so has absolutely no practical effect on the story whatsoever, but it is kind of neat. Extreme Measures is an affix to the Pact of Punishment in the original Hades, which affects the bosses that appear in the end of each Underworld area in various interesting ways. Extreme Measures itself has 4 different levels of attainability, with each level affecting 1 boss each. So, for example, if you're playing with Extreme Measures 1, then only the Fury Sisters boss fight will undergo any sort of change. Extreme Measures 2, though, will affect the Fury Sisters and the next boss, the Bone Hydra, and so on and so forth. The basic changes to all of the bosses in Extreme Measures are as follows. In the Fury Sisters fight, all 3 sisters will appear to battle at once, with one being the main combatant, just as before, and the other 2 serving as backup. In the Lerny fight, Zagreus will find himself in a much larger arena filled with magma. Here, the Hydra's main head is in the center of the room, and more subheads appear at intervals spread out around all 360 degrees, of which the new arena is comprised. In the Theseus and Asterius fight, both characters will have received new armor, which signifies their newer power. Out of the 2, Theseus undergoes the most comprehensive changes during this bout, having his traditional moveset replaced by an armored chariot atop which he rides. To make matters all the worse, though, Asterius also gains an arsenal of new and modified techniques, which make him much more tough to deal with in the meantime. And then at last, there's Hades himself, whose set of changes from Extreme Measures is probably the most substantial. Not only does he receive increased health, additional damage dealt, a slew of new attacks, an aura effect that slows Zagreus whenever he's in the vicinity of one of the thrown skulls, the ability to heal from his green vases, and summoning Cerberus during the second phase, but atop all of that, Hades also receives a completely unique third phase, in which light on the battlefield is severely limited. And of course, the third phase also has some notoriously kick-ass music. But now that we've explored everything there is to see here in Tier 1, it's time to descend through the gates of the Underworld, reach the mouth of the River Styx, and begin our descent into Tier 2. We've talked about Skelly/Skellimaeus early on in Tier 1, but among his many secrets and interesting tidbits of lore is a brief segment of dialogue that can be accessed from the training grounds in Hades 1. See, when you hit Skelly with a weapon, all of the weapon's effects will be demonstrated on him, including knockback. And so leveraging this aspect of the Aegis shield in particular, which is far and away the weapon with the most natural knockback, it's possible to push Skelly all the way to the Tartarus Overlook found at the left-hand side of the training grounds, and if you do this, you'll be able to see a very brief bit of hidden dialogue from Skelly himself, acknowledging how far he's moved from his spawn point.
Don't think I'm supposed to be here.
The narrator is an omnipresent character that we become acquainted with over the course of both Hades games, chronicling both adventures through certain points of interest. In the first Hades game, the identity of the narrator was left up in the air, though they were interacted with directly by Zagreus at a few points during the story, with probably the narrator's most significant part in the story being that he inadvertently reveals to Zagreus that Nyx is not his real mother, thus setting into motion all of the events of the game to begin with.
Thus did Prince of the Underworld Zagreus absorb the contents of this hidden letter, written in his mother's hand.
His mother's hand. My mother's hand? Wait, what? You're saying this Persephone, that she's my mother? But Father always said that Nyx was that liar. He lied to me. They both did. All my life.
Thus did the prince discover, inadvertently, the well-kept truth about his lineage. Entirely by chance, this did occur.
Because of both this and the opening cutscene that plays at the start of a new save file, it's insinuated that the narrator is a writer or storyteller of some renown, and a similar intro plays at the beginning of Hades 2 as well, which is also where it's revealed in an early flashback sequence that this fourth wall-breaking narrator is actually none other than Homer, the famous Greek poet and author of such works as the Iliad and the Odyssey.
Shush, Homer. How shall I ever catch her if you're going to describe my every move?
I've no idea to whom you refer, to whom the Princess of the Dead refers, as she continues on her fateful search.
This is made all the more interesting when we realize that characters like Odysseus and Circe appear in the game, these being figures that Homer wrote about extensively within his works. I don't know about you, but Dusa is one of my favorite characters from the original Hades. She takes the form of a floating Gorgon head, and is employed around the house to clean and perform general upkeep, which of course means that Zagreus can encounter and speak with her a number of times in between escape attempts. At first, she'll be extremely shy, but eventually will open up to Zag a little bit, and we'll get to know a bit more about her. But one thing that Dusa never really reveals to us is her past, or more particularly, who she was before arriving at the house, or where she came from. Now, I think that everyone with even a passing knowledge of Greek myth probably understands that Dusa's name is a reference to Medusa, the most well-known of the Gorgons, whose visage itself was said to have the capability of turning men to stone with a single glance. But Dusa's name is just, well, Dusa, and not Medusa, so are these two characters actually one and the same, or is the real Medusa somewhere out there still? Well, in Greek mythology, Medusa's head was severed from her body by Perseus, which could explain why Dusa is nothing more than a severed head here in the Underworld. But she's not the only one. All Gorgons actually share a similar appearance, so it's hard to say whether this is just a creative decision by Supergiant that's also a small nod to real-life mythology, or whether it has a more deliberate meaning in the case of Dusa in particular. Both Hades and Hades 2 were originally released as part of the Steam Early Access program, where a mostly complete build of the game is released to players usually at full price or slightly below, so that the developers can iron out the remainder of the bugs and add the rest of the content they want before a full release is committed. As of the time of recording, Hades 2 is actually still in Early Access, though it's received one content update so far in the latter half of May 2024. As a result of this release method, there are a number of differences between each game before and after exiting Early Access. If you were to go back and play the Day 1 build of Hades and compare it to today, you'd find a number of notable differences, including the fact that you could only play up through Asphodel before being kicked back to the House of Hades. The characters Hermes, Dionysus, Demeter, Orpheus, Thanatos, and Chaos would all be missing, along with their functionality. There would only be 4 weapons, as the fists and the adamant rail were not yet implemented, and none of the existing weapons would have any aspects. Megara would be the only Fury sister fought in the first boss fight, and there was no heat system in place. That's a lot of changes made over a relatively short span of time, all things considered, since Hades was released in 2018 and came out of Early Access in 2020. Hades 2, on the other hand, has a lot less actual content missing from the game, so far as we can tell, and more cosmetic or sprite-based pieces that have yet to be included. The game is only missing a very small additional area past the final boss fight in the Underworld, presumably where there would be some sort of narrative progression, and the Mount Olympus area on the surface, and potentially one other area if the surface follows the trend of a run consisting of 4 distinct locales as opposed to the mere 3 it would have with Olympus's inclusion. Other than that, the game is only missing 1 weapon, 2 tools, the secret aspects for each of the existing weapons, assuming that that's going to be implemented at all, and a bunch of sprites for characters like Charon, Narcissus, Echo, Hades, Medea, Icarus, and Circe, plus images associated with each of the keepsakes and boons. In Hades, building up enough rapport with certain characters will result in those characters awarding Zagreus with what's called a companion, which is essentially a separate category of keepsake that'll allow you to summon that character to assist you briefly in the thick of battle. In total, there are 6 different companions to collect, all gained from 6 different characters found throughout the game, these being Megara, Thanatos, Sisyphus, Dusa, Skelly, and Achilles. But even though, for the most part, each and every one of those summons will work whenever and wherever you try and use them, there are a few very notable exceptions. For example, if Zagreus tries to use Batty, the summon awarded for Megara against any of the Fury Sisters, then that cast will fail, because of course that would be friendly fire. At a certain point late into Hades, there's a small chance that you may find a bag of obols behind Charon whenever he may be stationed in the underworld, with one simple cue at the bottom of the screen, which reads, "Borrow 300 obol?" Potentially a fairly tempting offer, but by taking it, you're also taking a massive risk, for doing so will incite Charon's wrath, and soon enough, the Stygian boatman will transport you to an arena in Erebus, where you'll be forced to do battle. Charon uses a whole host of devastating effects that deal substantial damage even in the late game, made all the worse by the fact that encountering this fight is almost completely unpredictable since it appears at random up through Elysium, so don't hold out hope that your build is going to be complete when you fight him. Should you manage to successfully bring the boatman down to 20% of his health bar though, the fight will be called off and you'll be awarded both that 300 obol that you attempted to borrow, but also a loyalty card, which will persist until the end of the run and which grants a discount on all items at Charon's shop. Hades 2, being just as robust and story-rich as the first game, has an absurdly great deal of in-game text, all of which is beautifully narrated by the game's cast, and with truly impressive levels of attention to detail paid to each and every facet of the world. One extraordinary example, albeit not a particularly obscure one, of this attention to detail is that after each and every run, Malinois will be able to interact not only with all of the regular characters at the crossroads, but also with a relatively secret encounter in the form of Phrynos, this frog that sits in the clearing where she respawns. You can interact with Phrynos again every single time you return here, and there's a bafflingly large amount of variety to the dialogue that can play. Malinois may divulge how and where she died, to what, and all other manner of relevant information from her previous run, which may help to reflect slightly on the nature of what went wrong and what she could do differently. Now make no mistake, the dialogue here isn't particularly robust or revealing in terms of its content, but the fact that it exists at all goes to show the level of care that Supergiant has for their games. Of all the characters in Hades 2, Hecate is probably the most thoroughly riddled with both subtle and not-so-subtle references to her depictions in real-world Greek myth. Her character design reflects her association with magic and witchcraft owing to her hat and the dark coloration of her clothing, obviously, but something that not as many players may have caught is that the 2 faces upon her pauldrons is likely a reference to how Hecate is sometimes depicted in Greek mythology as a 3-headed being. This may also be referenced in her ability to create 2 different clones of herself during her boss fight, and the twin torches which she fights with are also one of her symbols. Aside from magic, one of the other domains that Hecate is often associated with is the concept of crossroads, which is of course the name of the hub location in the game, and she has an association with animals such as dogs, cats, and frogs. And, as we've already seen, the frog Phrynos that sits next to Malinois's respawn area is the first familiar that she can encounter in the game, suggesting yet another nod to myth, along with the black dog and the polecat, which can both be found in the early game near the cauldron. Skelly is unlike a lot of other characters found in Hades, not only because of his closeness to Zagreus, but also because of the mystery around the circumstances which brought him to the House of Hades to begin with. There's a small B-plot in the early to mid-section of the game, which concerns Zagreus trying to uncover the identity of Skelly's employer, as ever since the very beginning of the game, it's abundantly clear that Skelly is not there at the behest of Hades, as could be said of many other characters. After going back and forth for a time though, Zagreus will threaten Skelly with a lack of violence, unless he reveals who it is that sent him, at which point he'll spill the beans.
No mercy, Skelly. Tell me, or else.
It will be only pleasantries between us from here on out.
All right. But you gotta promise me something. Promise not to let on or tell anybody in your fancy house, all right? Or else I'm done for. I'm serious.
I promise. So?
It's Charon.
It's not entirely clear why Skelly would have been sent by Charon in the first place, but there is a reference in Skelly's artwork that may have hinted at this connection before it was even revealed in-game. In Skelly's mouth, we can see the outline of a golden obol, which actually stems from a real ancient Greek tradition, in which an obol would be placed in the mouth of a deceased person so that in death, it would be possible to pay Charon to transport them to the underworld. So the associations between these two actually go even further than may at first meet the eye. Encountering Nemesis on runs through the underworld is not an uncommon occurrence in Hades 2. She appears largely at random with the intent to defeat Kronos, just as Malinois does, but she's far too prideful to accept the latter's offer of collaboration in any form. Instead, she'll make her way down to Tartarus separately from you in the story, and when encountered, there are a few different types of interactions that can be had. The first is that she'll challenge Malinois to a wager of sorts, in which both characters slay enemies in order to rack up obols, with whoever has the most obol at the end taking the entire combined pot. In the other scenario, Nemesis will already have cleared the room, and offers Malinois a deal wherein she's permitted a free shot in trade for some obol, upgrade, or item. Both of these encounters appear to manifest at similar rates of frequency, but what concerns us today is actually what transpires after the encounter. For if and only if the room where you meet Nemesis has 2 exits, she'll dash for one of the options as soon as the interaction is completed, claiming one of the doors before Malinois has a chance to take it. But if you act fast, it's possible to enter a door before Nemesis, and in doing so, there will be some unique little points of dialogue only seen from this particular interaction.
Well, I'm off.
Ares, the Greek god of war, is a fan-favorite character in Hades, and one who is undeniably an extremely powerful ally to have during your runs. Ares grants boons to players that deal primarily in increasing DPS and inflicting Ares' own special condition, Doom, which results in enemies taking a chunk of damage a few seconds after they were initially hit. But aside from the powerful enhancements that he can offer Zagreus, Ares is also special because he's one of the few gods capable of tracking some sort of stat within your save file. The next time that you encounter Ares after slaying either 100, 1000, or 10,000 foes over the course of the save, he'll congratulate you on the feat, and remark that he's been keeping track, which is a pretty interesting little ability that makes for some unique and memorable dialogue.
You are a most impressive death dealer, my kin. For by my estimation, you have slain at least 1,000 souls down there. Souls mostly having died before, but still.
Unlocked through the Cauldron midway through the story of Hades 2, the Pitch Black Stone functions as an extra menu through which we can interact with trials offered to Malinois by Chaos. Taking on these trials is the primary way to earn Stardust, which is a resource used in everything from creating new spells at the Cauldron to upgrading particular pieces of equipment and more. But there's a little bit more than meets the eye where these trials are concerned, as is revealed by the very first one in which you can partake. Here, you'll be tasked with blitzing through Erebus as quickly as possible, using an extremely overpowered loadout granted to us by Chaos. But although Chaos makes these interactions out to sound as simulations of some sort, dialogue between Malinois and Hecate, both during her boss fight during the trial and after we return to the Crossroads after its conclusion, insinuates that the challenges put forth by the Pitch Black Stone actually take place in alternate realities or timelines that really do exist. It's not 100% confirmed that this is the case, but it's certainly very heavily implied, which begs a number of questions as to the ramifications of the Pitch Black Stone's use in both those realities as well as ours. The fight between Theseus, Asterius, and Zagreus is a rather unique encounter in the original Hades, as it's the only boss fight in the game that takes place in front of an audience, and in fact, judging by the crowd, it's pretty clear that the legendary hero and the Bull of Minos are very much favored to win this bout. But if you look hard enough in the crowd, you'll see that there is a lone red shade with a banner indicating that they are rooting for Zagreus instead. And in fact, they've been there the whole time, for this banner is also present in the arena where you fight Asterius solo. Kronos, the main antagonist of Hades 2 and the final boss of the Underworld, also happens to be the formidable Titan of Time in Greek mythology. As a result, there's many references to time both as a concept and as it pertains to Kronos at multiple points throughout the game, and time manipulation is as large a part of the Titan's identity as you would expect. However, probably one of the coolest instances of Kronos exercising his time manipulation abilities results in him completely breaking the fourth wall, and prohibiting you from pausing the game during his boss fight. If you try to do it, Kronos will hit you with some secret dialogue and reverse the action, resuming time and thus resuming the fight.
No. You do not control the flow of time. Not here.
With that being said, though, it will become possible to brew a new spell at the cauldron in the crossroads at some point, which will prohibit Kronos from overriding the pause menu from that point forward, which will also result in its own set of unique dialogue.
Again with this foolishness? Wait, what? Stuck? How? Impossible.
The fishing mechanic in the first Hades game is beloved by many players, even though it's also notoriously difficult when compared with other fishing systems. In Hades, there are 3 types of fish that can be caught: common, rare, and legendary. But by far the hardest catch in the game are the legendary fish, owing to the simple yet highly precise nature of what it takes to actually catch one, combined with a bit of RNG. Fishing in the game essentially works like this. Once the bobber is pulled under, a timer starts. This timer gauges the interval between the lure being pulled under and your reaction to it, and regardless of how long it takes you to hit the associated button, there are 3 possible outcomes. If it takes you more than 2/3 of a second to reel in the line, you'll fail with a too late message being displayed on screen. If your reaction time is between 1 and 2/3 of a second, you'll receive a regular catch, with a 50% chance to catch a fish in the common category and a 50% chance for a fish in the rare category. And finally, if your reaction time is less than 1/3 of a second, you'll make a perfect catch, which is also a 50-50 split, this time between rare and legendary fish. So not only must you pull in the line extremely fast, but you also still have to overcome a coin flip to receive the best fish. There's a different set of fish in each area of the game, and on screen now I'll have the full list of all of them, including legendaries, and where they can be found. Feel free to pause the video if you want to look a little bit closer before we move on. Despite there being a good amount of talk as to how the Crossroads is concealed from Kronos in Hades 2, it's far from clear where the Crossroads actually is in canon. Judging by the environs, it's safe to assume that it's probably located somewhere in, or at least very near to Erebus, though the Crossroads probably get their name from having easy access to both Erebus and the surface simultaneously, so we know that it must be sandwiched between these locations somehow. Though there doesn't seem to be anything quite analogous to the Crossroads itself present in Greek myth, as we've already touched on before, the Greeks heavily associated the concept of the crossroads with Hecate. Either way though, it's time for us to make our way down the Styx and explore the further regions of this iceberg with Tier 3. At some point in the original Hades, a conversation can be had between Zagreus and Thanatos, in which Zagreus comments about Thanatos formerly having a different, longer hairstyle.
It sure must have taken a lot of courage for you to come right up and tell me you thought I looked better before I cut my hair. I still ask myself how come I didn't keep ignoring you after that. Or slice your head off.
At first, it might seem like there's basically nothing to this, just an inconsequential piece of filler dialogue without any particularly groundbreaking merit, but on December 30th of 2020, Gen Z, the art director and character designer at Supergiant Games, released a piece of concept art on Twitter that portrays Thanatos in this style, which is honestly a pretty awesome little reference to an altogether fairly forgettable piece of dialogue. The first time that Zagreus comes into contact with Thanatos, the god of death, during any given playthrough will always take place in Elysium, before anywhere else. But though this may seem like a random consequence of Hades' game design, or just a convenient place to put the character so that the encounter feels more distinct, there also seems to be another reason, stemming of course from real-world Greek antiquity and myth. According to legend, it's said that Thanatos, along with his brother Hypnos, actually resided in Elysium, so it's entirely possible that this may have also served as a justification for putting him here. Players will probably notice relatively quickly, whether from first-hand accounts from gameplay or from seeing it in the Hades 2 animated reveal trailer, that Malinoe's left hand has some very different properties from the rest of her body. It's immediately clear that this is not a normal biotic limb, but rather something else entirely different. We can see the bone structure through a vaguely luminescent greenish skin of sorts that somewhat resembles the body of a shade, and because of the stark differences here, you may expect that the arm would be addressed in some way through the Hades 2 storyline, which, in a manner of speaking at least, it is. To call this dialogue secret would be a bit of a stretch, though it is a little bit off the beaten path, since at a certain point when talking to Hecate in the crossroads at the end of a run, the following dialogue will play.
Using the cauldron doesn't drain me as once it did, though I know I mustn't be reckless.
Indeed, lest your fair right hand come to match your left. Although perhaps that boy shade Icarus would fancy you more if that were so.
So it seems our protagonist may have been a little overzealous with the cauldron at an earlier point in time, which somehow resulted in her cooking so hard that she lost the arm. I don't know, I can't help but feel like there's a little bit of something that we might be missing here, such as the specifics of the spell in question, which cost the limb, but truth be told, I'm just glad that they addressed this at all, and I appreciate that it's left a little bit open-ended. There are 3 fully romanceable characters in the original Hades game, but although every single one of these characters expresses a wish to keep their relationship with Zagreus out of the eyes of the other residents of the House of Hades, there is one character who will, without fail, always be able to sense exactly who it is that Zagreus has the hots for, that being, of course, the goddess of love and romance herself, Aphrodite. She's got some unique dialogue for each of the 3 characters in question, which can be heard at random when picking up one of her boons, after the aforesaid romance has blossomed.
So my heart tells me that you've developed quite the bond with moody Thanatos, haven't you there? I always figured that his brooding quality was just an act.
Let's make one thing perfectly clear. Zagreus is a god, and as much is said of him in the original Hades, though the question of what he's actually a god of comes up various times at multiple points within the game. Zagreus himself constantly asserts that he is the god of nothing, but many other characters pitch in their individual thoughts and beliefs on the matter, most notably Achilles and Sisyphus, who state that Zagreus may hold power over life and companionship respectively. But in the post-epilogue portion of the game, it seems we get our definitive answer after a particular conversation with Hades, in which the god of the dead lambasts his son for being the god of nothing, which leads to the following words being spoken at the start of the next run.
I am the god of blood.
But I know what some of you are probably thinking. How does this line up with the real-world myth? And the answer is, surprisingly, pretty unclear. According to most scholarly sources, Zagreus is most commonly likened to Dionysus as seen in the Orphic religion, but there's very little additional information about him, so for all we know, it's certainly plausible that either Zag himself or even his friends may be correct, especially since concepts such as companionship are mildly similar conceptually to Dionysus's domain, while the idea of Zagreus being a god of life may be a logical extension of his association with blood. The resident bard of the House of Hades, the legendary Orpheus is a relatively minor character in the game, most well known for 2 things: his B-plot involving the rekindling of his romance with Eurydice, and his selection of songs that will be played in the House of Hades or elsewhere. There are 4 songs in total. The first is the Lament of Orpheus, which can be heard after giving the singer a nectar, and which details the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice. The story goes that in ancient times, Orpheus, a mortal man, traveled to the depths of the underworld in order to retrieve his dead lover Eurydice. But there was a stipulation, as there always seems to be in old Greek tales. In this case, Orpheus was not permitted to look at Eurydice until they had ascended to the surface again, but in the last moments of the journey, Orpheus lost his composure, glancing back, thereby losing the love of his life yet again. The next song, the Hymn of Zagreus, will be sung after Orpheus has regained his will to sing, and after a conversation in which Zagreus fabricates a story that he and Dionysus are the same god, which, if you were paying attention in the last entry, is actually in line with the real-world Orphic origins of Zagreus as a god. So while in Hades, Orpheus is singing about a tale which is, unbeknownst to him, fictional, it actually regales a lot of the known information about Zagreus in actual Greek myth, which is pretty funny. The third is called Good Riddance, and this is our first duet between Orpheus and Eurydice after they've been reunited, with lyrics exemplifying Eurydice's attitude and philosophy toward her eternity in the underworld. And finally, there is the song that is my personal favorite, and I imagine the favorite of a lot of other people as well, sung by both Orpheus and Eurydice this time, entitled In the Blood, which takes place during the credit sequence and occasionally can be heard in Eurydice's chamber after this point. The meaning behind the song is more of a general musing about the nature of life, death, and family as portrayed in Hades, and as it pertains to Greek myth. Interestingly, there's also a fifth song which is referenced in-game, but which, to my knowledge at least, is never actually played. Shortly after buying Orpheus's freedom from the house contractor, Zagreus can speak to the bard before partaking in a run, where the song Argonauts will be referenced, but it isn't used or played at any point. In the early development phases of Hades, the game was supposed to take a very different direction to the title that we've since come to know and love. Originally known as Minos, Supergiant's original vision had Theseus as the main protagonist, battling through an ever-shifting labyrinth in order to encounter and combat the Minotaur at the maze's end. But a major issue arose with the concept of Theseus as a protagonist, whom many at Supergiant felt was simply too generic to base an entire game around, and so this initial idea was eventually scrapped in favor of focusing the story around the misadventures of an obscure deity known as Zagreus. There are a number of hidden pieces of dialogue that can be achieved from various characters only through reaching certain points in a run in either Hades or Hades 2, while not utilizing various mechanics or meta-progression techniques. Perhaps the most easily accomplished is by defeating Megara at her very first boss fight in Tartarus without using any of the effects gleaned from Nyx's mirror in the House of Hades, to which she'll remark,
"Beaten by you, without the help of Nyx's mirror. You humiliated me, and now you've come to rub it in, I guess. Well, go on then. Not like you can shame me anymore."
More impressively though, there are also at least 2 different voice lines that can be achieved from Hades himself if you reach his boss fight without using any boons from Olympus.
Odd. No stink of Olympus on you this time. Have you truly come all this way without assistance from your relatives? Or were you overzealous at a pool of purging? Nary a whiff of Mount Olympus on you this time. How is it that you clambered all this way without the generous support of your dear family? Doubtless you merely purged their blessings for some coin.
And of course, there are also a few such instances in Hades 2, such as if you beat Hecate without employing any cards of the Arcana.
The Arcana gave to you no benefit at all this evening. Still, you bested me. I know not whether to heap praise or reprimand you for being such a little show-off.
These are only a few examples of the types of dialogue you can achieve during restricted runs, but there's definitely more out there that I haven't talked about. So if you're feeling brave, why not give some of these runs a try yourself? Who knows what you might find. The romance system in Hades 2 is a lot more robust than the original game, doubling the amount of romanceable characters and adding a series of interactions with them that's far different from anything we saw in Hades, the most notable of which is the hot spring system. Throughout the game, after enough nectar has been gifted to different characters, and after the hot spring has been uncovered using the cauldron, Malinoe will be able to gift bath salts to certain characters, at which point that character may join you in the hot springs for a short session of dialogue accompanied accompanied by entirely new, detailed sprites of both Malinois and the other participant. As stated previously, there are 6 characters that can be interacted with in this way, these being Hecate, Odysseus, Nemesis, Moros, Dora, and Eris. In Hades, caged bats were an upgrade that could be purchased from the house contractor to refurbish the house. By interacting with the bats, you would be able to take a look at the house's floor plan from a bat's eye view, and this was a well-liked mechanic among the player base of the original game, as it allowed you to see all of the furnishings and progress you'd unlocked from one place. And so, some were interested to see if the bats would make a return in Hades 2, which they do, but in a different way. Instead of the bats allowing you to get a better look at the crossroads, purchasing the caged bats from the cauldron will instead allow you to survey the entire city on the surface, which makes it much easier to plot out which rooms you'd like to visit and in what order, so that you can make the most of your time in this location before proceeding to the fight with Polyphemus. Dora, the shade that haunts Malinois's tent in the crossroads, is a character that fills a similar role around the camp as Dusa did in the House of Hades within the previous game. She's an extra character that adds a bit of dialogue, but doesn't have much overall bearing on the greater story of the experience, though, much like Dusa, many have wondered what Dora's background may be. Being a shade, Dora can't remember her time among the living, but through conversation with both Malinois and Moros, it's revealed that she's one of the oldest shades in the entire grove. And combined with her name, this has led some to posit the idea that perhaps Dora was once Pandora, the first mortal woman according to Greek myth, and the very same figure who famously opened Pandora's box, or more accurately, Pandora's jar, unleashing onto the world a great many negative concepts, including various states of disease, and in some interpretations, death, particularly of the untimely variety, which just so happens to be the concept embodied by Moros, with whom Dora has a particular interest. If Zagreus is killed by Asterius and they're able to talk to Hypnos after returning to the House of Hades, then Hypnos himself will be overjoyed when recounting the tale of your death, since, as it turns out, the god of sleep is actually a huge fan of the Bull of Minos, and from here, he'll ask Zagreus to attain an autograph for him the next time they meet. So it is that when encountering Asterius again in his solo fight, he'll actually go ahead and give you the autograph to pass back to Hypnos at the House of Hades, to which Hypnos will be overjoyed and even become a little bit emotional.
What's this? It's kind of hard to read the handwriting. It says, "No way. To Hypnos, my biggest fan. Stay vigilant. Asterius. There's even a little picture of a bull. Wow. Wow!"
For each weapon in Hades, there are a total of 4 aspects that can be unlocked, mostly through purchasing them with chthonic keys, but the 4th set of aspects are a little bit different. Dubbed secret aspects, what sets them apart, aside from how they're unlocked, is that each is named after not an icon of Greek myth, but instead a legendary figure from elsewhere in world mythology and culture. All of the secret aspects and who they belong to are as follows. The aspect of Arthur is meant to represent Excalibur, the legendary blade wielded by King Arthur during the 5th and 6th century AD, as told of in Welsh legend. The aspect of Guan Yu is the secret aspect of the Eternal Spear, named after the infamous Chinese military general under the Han Dynasty. The Aegis Shield's aspect of Beowulf references a hero told of in the famed epic poem of old, attributed to an anonymous author around the year 1000 AD. The Heart-Seeking Bow has an aspect of Rama, the 7th avatar of Vishnu in Hinduism. The Twin Fists evoke Gilgamesh, a figure dating back to the 2nd millennium BC, who's spoken of in the ancient Mesopotamian text, the Epic of Gilgamesh, and finally, the Adamant Rail possesses the aspect of Lucifer, the fallen angel who would become the Christian devil. Eris is a character that we meet a little bit later into Hades 2 than much of the rest of the cast. Wielding Exegryph, the rail of adamants in her own aspect, as it appears in the original Hades, the goddess of strife will appear both in the crossroads, throwing rubbish on the ground to annoy Melinoë, and at the foot of Mount Olympus, also with the intent of prohibiting the progress of our hero. But there's also a third, somewhat hidden appearance of Eris that comes well before either of the other two if you play your cards right. If you progress through the game too quickly, meaning that you pass the trial of Hecate and proceed past Erebus in either the first or second night on a new save, you'll meet Eris just outside of the initial gate to Oceanus, where a conversation like the following will ensue.
You're a long way from the crossroads, Trouble. So this is where the real action is, huh? Weren't you supposed to still be practicing?
Things took a turn, Eris. You know how it goes. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some urgent business to attend to.
Always in such a rush. I'd really hate to slow you down. Though, let's hang out sometime, okay? Have a great night. Oh, one last thing.
The boon that she awards you, the Blessing of Strife, exists specifically to deter your progress further, so that players are unable to proceed without great difficulty before being knocked back to the crossroads in order to fall in line with the narrative events that are yet to unfold. Because of this blessing is absolutely unforgiving, causing all damage received by Melinoë to be boosted by 20% and adding an additional 5% after completing every single room from here until you either die or reach the end of the run. An absolutely brutal nerf, to be sure, albeit one that comes packaged with a unique, rather secret character interaction. And with all of that out of the way, let's move on to Tier 4. Orpheus's design in Hades is certainly a standout from the rest of the cast. His robust head of hair is of particular note, but his gaunt face and figure also add to his narrative as a soul tortured at great length at the hands of Hades. But Orpheus's likeness may also have been inspired by another fictional character with a similar name. Dream is a character in the Sandman comic series, also known as Morpheus, who bears a striking resemblance to Orpheus in the ways previously mentioned. From what I can tell, there's not any particularly strong thematic references between the characters, but at the same time I've never actually read the Sandman comics, I'm just going off of the wiki page here, so maybe there is a clearer reference that a more devout Sandman fan might be able to bring to light for us in the comments. Either way, the visual similarities are rather striking. Once Zagreus has built up enough reputation with Sisyphus on his way out of Tartarus, a secret interaction will be unlocked in which Zagreus can offer nectar to Boldy, the rock which Sisyphus is doomed to push uphill for all of eternity. Despite what you may at first think, there is actually a compelling reason to do this if you have some extra nectar lying around, especially in the late game, because in doing so, Boldy will bestow upon you a boon called Heart of Stone, which has a wide variety of potential positive effects, one of which will be selected at random. Many of these effects are similar to aspects of the Mirror of Nyx, such as a 1 to 10% increase in attack damage, special damage, cast damage, damage reduction, move speed, or obol obtained. But there's also a plus 2% ambiguity bonus, which appears to do nothing to Zagreus whatsoever, as its name may imply. Zoraphet, the Moonstone Axe, is Hades 2's signature heavy weapon. Allowing for a slower swinging build with a more sparse but harder hitting attack, it's a pick for a very particular type of player. But like the other weapons in the game, Zoraphet has a number of weapon aspects that can be unlocked throughout play, with one of these aspects being that of Thanatos. This, in turn, transforms the axe into a massive death-dealing scythe, wielded by the god in the first game. And if you manage to make it all the way to Kronos wielding it, he'll comment on the scythe before your bout, and even reveal the name of his scythe in turn.
You may have taken death, yet death is here for you. It would be fitting if you met your end by Zoraphet.
It would be most unlikely, I should think. Then let us match now, scythe to scythe. Your Zoraphet against my Rhodopsis, and we shall imminently see who reaps and who sows.
Across the Hades series, Artemis is the only Olympian to not actually reside on Olympus. Being as she is the goddess of the hunt, Artemis instead chooses to spend her time among the living, in forests and locations closely associated with her domain. All in all, it's clear that Artemis prefers to keep to herself when opposed with the other gods of Olympus, especially due to the fact that she's taken no significant other, which is an uncommon stance in the world of Greek myth. But given the right conditions, the following conversation has a chance to play out.
Hey, Zagreus. There's something I've been wondering, and don't take this the wrong way or anything, okay? Oh no. It's her.
Why, Artemis, you're absolutely tongue-tied. Due to our little godling in the underworld, or a little due to me? You shall figure it all out, I'm sure.
Look, what was I... just... never mind. I'll talk to you some other time, I guess.
While the game leaves things a bit open-ended here, it certainly seems that Artemis may have a sort of crush on either Zagreus, or perhaps more likely, with Aphrodite, which may explain why she's taken no husband and bore no children in the Greek pantheon. Even when the story of Hades has been at last exhausted, there will still be things for Zagreus to do, and reasons for players to continue pursuing runs. There may still be house contracts to fulfill, secret weapon aspects to unlock, or upgrades to purchase at Nyx's Mirror. But even after all of these stretch goals are completed, the game's longest stretch goal will still likely await. Introducing the Resource Director, a shade that will be unlocked within the House of Hades sometime after the end credits have rolled. The purpose of this shade is to give Zagreus a use for all of those excess resources he'll undoubtedly be collecting well after they've served the extent of their use in-game, by awarding him a rank which will appear on screen as part of subsequent runs. The rank serves no practical purpose, but it supplies something for players to work toward even after the completion of the Hades story. But if you want to pursue the highest rank there is, then be warned, for an exceedingly long and grindy process awaits. In total, there are 50 ranks to ascend, each costing more resources than the last, but most prestigious of all is the rank of Unseen One, which signifies the end of what the Resource Director is able to accept. Since only one rank can be unlocked per run, it's going to take at least a minimum of 50 runs to reach Unseen One to begin with. Already a rather large task, but realistically, it's almost certainly going to take you much, much more, considering the sheer amount of stuff that the Director wants between ranks. In total, to achieve the Unseen One ranking, you'll need to run at least 50 times, fork over a grand total of 100 chthonic keys, 50 nectar, 10 of each floor reward resource, Titan's Blood, Diamonds, and Ambrosia respectively, and last but certainly not least, 325,000 darkness. How's that for a stretch goal? It's hard to miss the massive skull that Hades wears upon his shoulders in the first game, and although they suit the garb of the god of the underworld to a T, players may find themselves wondering where exactly such massive and prominent pauldrons may have come from in the first place. Luckily, dialogue that can occur between Hades and his son sheds some light on this very matter.
Always wanted to ask you something, Father. Whose skull is that there on your shoulder? If it's not too personal.
I did not chronicle all Typhon's wretched offspring, boy. No one did. Some of them sit upon our shoulders now, lest we forget that things could easily have turned out rather differently, and much, much worse.
So these are just the remains of the spawn of the most hideous monstrosity of all time, which you and your brother slew, got it?
Typhon is widely considered one of the most deadly, evil, and blasphemous creatures in all of Greek myth. Taking the form of a massive serpentine giant, it was born from a number of different sources according to different versions of the myth, but most commonly, Typhon was thought to have been the spawn of Gaia, the literal incarnation of Mother Earth, and Tartarus itself. With his mate Echidna, Typhon would go on to father some of the most well-known and adversarial monsters in the entirety of the Greek mythos, including both Cerberus and the Lernaean Hydra. Now, Hades said something interesting here though, mentioning that neither himself nor anyone else really kept track of all of Typhon's progeny, though, by his own account, the skulls that sit upon his shoulders most certainly belonged to one of them. The idea that some of Typhon's kin are not known is also a theme that largely extends to real-world Greek myth, since many accounts tell of its countless monstrous offspring, but few really take the time to account for all of them. So it seems that at least for now, the exact nature of the creature that was felled to create these pauldrons shall remain unknown. In both Hades and Hades 2, players will have the opportunity to reveal special rewards in the training grounds in the form of statues for completing runs with varying levels of heat or fear respectively. In the first game, these beautifully cut stoneworks show Skelly in varying poses and postures, to which Zagreus is less than enthused. In Hades 2, this joke continues, as Skelly, now Skellimaeus, awards Melinoe with a similar set of statues, this time depicting her in a very, very over-dramatized manner.
Commander, is that supposed to be me?
In the original myth of Theseus and the Bull of Minos, it's said that Theseus employed a bit of cunning, unraveling a ball of string behind him as he traversed the labyrinth so that he could retrace his steps and prevent himself from getting lost along the way through the disorienting maze. This string is often referred to as the Yarn of Ariadne, named for the Cretan princess and daughter of King Minos who helped Theseus to escape the maze in the first place. Well, as it happens, the Yarn of Ariadne is also an item that can be purchased from the Well of Charon in the original Hades game, making it so that the next boon you get has increased rarity. And if you happen to have purchased the item from the well before reaching the Theseus and Asterius boss fight, there's some exclusive dialogue that will play wherein Theseus will become kind of tilted having been reminded of Ariadne again, and not just once either. This conversation will continue to develop across multiple instances of him bringing the yarn into battle.
Again, you mock me with the Yarn of Ariadne, blackguard! You ought to know that woman's name means absolutely nothing to me now.
You seem pretty put off by a random bit of twine there, former King of Athens. Care to share your innermost thoughts on the subject, or best keep them bottled up?
Nothing shall be bottled here, you filth. That she became enamored of me was not my responsibility besides. She was naive, the same as you.
Hades 2 saw the debut of Hephaestus within the series, the god of smithing, craftsmanship, and metalwork who typically bestows upon Melinoe boons with the ability to deal large chunks of damage at timed intervals. His blessings are certainly sought after, but an interesting aspect of the god himself is that he appears in a wheelchair, which is actually accurate to some depictions or accounts in myth. In particular is this depiction of the god, atop a winged wheelchair which, according to some sources, depicts Hephaestus making his return to Olympus from exile at the river Oceanus. In fact, it seems fairly likely that this artwork may have served as the reference for the character's appearance in the final game. In Hades, you may have noticed an easy-to-miss passenger hitching a ride in Hermes' satchel when accepting one of his boons. This turtle, who has appeared ever since Hermes was implemented in the original game, was never properly introduced in Hades, but was referred to by Supergiant as Chelly before the turtle made a full appearance in Hades 2. Now, fans were quick to look into the Chelly nickname, and for a long time, it was believed that Chelly was a shortened version of Chelony, a mythological figure whom either Hermes or Zeus turned into a turtle, and in some tellings of the myth, Hermes was said to have killed Chelony in order to turn her shell into a lyre. But with the release of Hades 2, the turtle's full name, Chelon, seems to suggest that the tortoise is not meant to represent Chelony in a literal fashion. Instead, it can once again be seen hitching a ride in Hermes' satchel or sitting atop the shrine of Hermes, which functions in a similar manner to the Wells of Charon, but on the surface as opposed to in the underworld. Now, hopefully this entry doesn't break anyone's immersion too bad, but it ought to be said that the version of Kronos that we see depicted in Hades actually appears to be a sort of mashup between two distinct titans that are often considered their own separate things in Greek myth. One half of that equation is, of course, the Kronos we know, the Titan of Time, but the other is Kronos, the Titan of the Harvest. The reason for this is largely because of the family lineage as portrayed in Hades, which attributes Kronos as the father of both Nyx and Hades simultaneously, whereas real Greek myth states that Kronos fathered Nyx, while Kronos was the father to Hades, along with his siblings Zeus and Poseidon, as well as Hestia, Demeter, and Hera depending on your mythological interpretation. In addition, Kronos as seen in Hades was chopped into pieces and thrown into Tartarus before being brought to flesh again in the storyline of the game, which is a punishment that he shares with Kronos. It is worth noting though that in some interpretations of the myth, Kronos and Kronos are indeed considered the same being, or at least facets of each titan can be seen within the other. And although that's a little bit confusing, it is largely owing to the similarity of name, though from what I can tell, this matter is still somewhat disputed by scholars of Greek antiquity. In the ancient Greek tale known as the Judgment of Paris, it's said that at the wedding of the hero Peleus and the sea nymph Thetis, at which many legendary gods and figures were in attendance, Eris, the goddess of strife, who was not invited, enacted her revenge by dropping a golden apple into the attendees, on which were inscribed the words, "To the fairest." This caused the gods Athena, Aphrodite, and Hera to dispute the fairest among them, and eventually left the decision to Paris of Troy, also known as Alexander. As the story goes, Paris abided with Aphrodite after he was bribed by the goddess, who presented him with the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen of Sparta, whom Paris promptly brought to Troy, which of course prompted the Greeks to retaliate. This conflict is known today as the Trojan War, and as a consequence, Eris's appearance and her golden apple were, in a manner of speaking at least, the inciting forces behind one of the most legendary battles ever written about. The reason I'm telling you all of this though, aside from it being pretty cool, is that, as some of you may have suspected, this story is the reason why Eris awards a golden apple upon her defeat at the foot of Mount Olympus in Hades 2, for it's modeled after that very same Apple of Discord from all those years ago. Lazarus Planet was a mildly well-received crossover event comic book series from DC Comics that ran from January to February 2023, featuring art from Riccardo Frederici and Billy Tan. The storyline revolves around the magical ramifications of a volcanic eruption that took place on Lazarus Island, which indirectly altered the powers of prominent superheroes around the globe. The series features various heroes and villains from the DC universe, being a tie-in series and all, but one particular issue, Lazarus Planet, We Once Were Gods, has a tie-in that many readers probably weren't expecting. What you're seeing now is a panel from this issue, wherein legions of the undead begin to invade the island of the Amazons, which is a location associated with Wonder Woman. And two of these guys ought to look pretty familiar, because that's Theseus and Asterius in all of their zombified glory. Now, I wouldn't have been completely convinced of this myself, except for the symbol on Theseus's belt, which seems to have been put there by the artist specifically to make sure that this was seen as an intentional reference to Hades. So yeah, kinda neat stuff. And with that, let us proceed to the deepest regions of Tartarus as we move down to our final tier in today's video, Tier 5. The Eldest Sigil is an upgrade that can be purchased from the House Contractor, which plays a pivotal role in the reuniting of Nyx with Chaos late in the game. It sits in the administrative chamber and allows Zagreus to finish the questline, but it also bears a cost of 3,142 darkness, which is no random number as it may at first seem. In reality, the number 3,142 is a reference to the presumed number of deities to exist across Greek myth, and since Chaos is the progenitor of all that exists according to legend, this certainly seems fitting. The boss of Oceanus and the second main boss encountered in Hades 2, Scylla is a fan-favorite character, with herself alongside her band, the Sirens, posing a pretty significant threat to Malinois. For the first time since fighting the Fury Sisters on extreme measures, Scylla and the Sirens force the player to grapple with 3 foes at once, diverting your attention and forcing you to deal with threats one at a time. It's a challenging fight to learn, but one that ought to proceed pretty smoothly once you get the hang of it. The thing is, there's a fairly deep-cut pop culture reference to be found here that many players may not have picked up on right away, found within the names of her band members. Jetty and Roxy may be a reference to jetties and rocks, which of course pose significant hazards to seafarers, but moreover, the characters may also be meant to reference a set of other characters by the same name from the cartoon series Gem, in which Jetta and Roxy are two members of the band known as the Misfits. I was pretty surprised to find how many layers this particular reference had, and I've come to really appreciate this fight and the sirens as side characters all the more ever since learning this. This is an aspect of the original Hades game that's seen some level of debate by fans. Some see it as an intentional detail, while others do not, but there's a theory that a strand of Achilles' hair, as shown in his character model, was made to look as if it were cut short on purpose. If this is the case, then it's likely meant to be a reference to Homer's Iliad, which details, in part, a ritual honoring the death of Patroclus, who is also seen in Hades. As Homer wrote, quote, "The woodcutters handled the logs as Meriones ordered, and stacked them on the shore where Achilles planned a great funeral mound for Patroclus and himself. When they had stacked the wood, the whole crowd sat and waited. Then Achilles gave orders to the warlike Myrmidons to don their armor and yoke the chariots. They did so, and the charioteers mounted their chariots. Then they set off, the chariots first, a host of warriors following on foot, with Patroclus in the midst, carried by his friends. They had cut off locks of their hair, and thrown them on the corpse till they covered it like a garment. Noble Achilles walked behind, supporting the head, sorrowing for the peerless comrade he was sending to Hades' halls. When they reached the place he'd appointed, they set the corpse down on a platform of wood. Now a fresh idea struck Achilles, and stepping back from the pyre, he cut a golden lock of his hair, which he had grown to honor the river god Spercheius. He looked out over the wine-dark sea and spoke anxiously to the god. "Spercheius, my father Peleus made vain prayer to you, vowing that if I came home to my native land, I'd cut my hair and offer a holy sacrifice of 50 unblemished rams at the precinct and fragrant altar where your waters flow. The old man made his vow, but you have denied fulfillment. Since I shall not return to my own dear native land, allow me to give this lock of hair to the warrior Patroclus to take with him." So, in essence, it's sort of unclear if this detail is actually intentional, but both the look and story of the character line up quite well with the Iliad, and as Patroclus does appear in-game, I wouldn't be surprised to find that this little nod was in fact intended. Unlike many of the other gods in both Hades and Hades 2, Hermes seems to have a particular interest in the events transpiring in both games. Perhaps as a result of being the messenger god, Hermes is more in tune with the goings-on of Zagreus, and especially Melinoë, than most of the other Olympians, including an indication that Hermes himself may have had a hand in drafting the Pact of Punishment, or at least that he may have had some influence over its design. When the Pact condition Tight Deadline is enabled, there's a chance that you'll receive a specific line of dialogue regarding his role in influencing it. Now, the big reason this entry is this far down on the iceberg, though, is that despite all of my looking, and trust me, I did really look for a long time for this piece of footage, I wasn't able to actually find it, either in-game or online. I put around 10 hours into searching for this piece of footage alone across 4 different save files that I have, and reached out to 2 different people to see if they had the footage, and came up with absolutely nothing. Now, the Hades wiki is pretty good about this sort of thing, and they have a blurb in their trivia section which backs up this interaction existing in-game, so I do feel reasonably confident that this isn't some kind of like mass hysteria thing where myself and a bunch of other people online just kind of dreamt this up, but unfortunately I don't have the footage to prove it. Did you know that in an early build of Hades 2 Early Access, it was pretty easy to get out of bounds in the crossroads? Surprisingly, this never gained very much traction online, but it's probably because the exploit that allowed this to happen was fixed in the very first major update of Hades 2, so I guess not a lot of people had time to actually discover it before it was fixed. But either way, all you had to do was stand in this position, like so, and simply sprint in this direction until you were behind the hot spring. From here, you can turn around and continue to to sprint and dash outward, and eventually around the entirety of the Crossroads map from the outside. As it happens, there's actually some stuff to find out here. To the southwest, there's a selection of what appear to be tents, or parts of an encampment, which are never actually seen or interacted with through normal means, and we can even work our way around to view the path to the training grounds from a new angle. And finally, we've reached our very last entry in today's video, which, more than anything, is something that I wanted to add here right at the end, because it's a facet of the world of Hades that I've been thinking about quite a lot while creating this iceberg, and that's the idea that the Greek pantheon we've seen depicted throughout the series so far is not the only one known to exist in the canon of the game. This is something that many of you probably started thinking about back in the Secret Aspects entry, when we talked about the fact that the infernal arms are wielded not just by Greek mythological figures, but other prominent figures throughout history and legend. A facet of the infernal and nocturnal arms respectively that many commonly overlook is that the aspects which comprise them aren't exclusively from those who have already wielded the arms in the past. Legendary figures who have yet to wield the weapons at later points in time can also have their aspects depicted, because the arms themselves and their wielders are directly influenced by the three fates. This is how characters like King Arthur and even Lucifer may wield these weapons, even though their stories likely take place at a later point in time than the stories we see in-game. As such, it's insinuated that the fates may have a hand in more decision-making than we might otherwise assume given the multi-pantheon interpretation. The only way for what we've seen to line up in canon is that the fates must have some form of influence over virtually everything done by a god or mortal in basically any religion and at any point in time. It's the fates who are responsible for the legend of Gilgamesh, the fates that are responsible for the conquests of Guan Yu, and they may even be seen as influencing events in Hinduism and Christianity. In this way, the true gods of the world of Hades are not the Olympians, nor the Chthonic, it's not the Titans, it's not even primordial chaos, it's the fates. Those with the most wide-reaching influence, whose threads weave across time and culture indiscriminately. Or, at least that's my theory. Either way though, that brings us to the end of the Hades series Iceberg, and with it, the end of this video. I hope you had some fun and enjoyed taking a look at some aspects of the Hades games that were hopefully a little bit different or new to you. If you made it this far, I'm gonna assume that you probably did. I feel like I say this damn near every video at this point, but this was one of my favorites to make. I know it's a little bit out of the wheelhouse of the type of game that I typically cover here, but as I said near the beginning, I absolutely adore Hades, and I have for a long time. Per the usual, if you enjoyed this video, then do consider leaving a like and, you know, subscribe to the channel, I guess, if you want to see more icebergs like this. In addition, I've accepted that there's no really good way to do this that doesn't make me sound like I'm engagement farming, but I really do want to know what types of things people were thinking about while they were watching this. Did you learn something you didn't know? Was there something that I should have added that I didn't put in the iceberg? Stuff like that. I'm really trying to improve this format and get better about offering consistently interesting trivia in these videos. So if you're feeling kind enough to clue me into those thoughts, then I would really appreciate you letting me know in the comments. Feedback like that really does help when I'm creating these uploads. Anyway, that's gonna do it for today. Thanks for watching yet again. This is Averberon. I'll see you again soon, and have a good one.